And kia ora, good afternoon, and welcome to today's Order Paper Show under urgency. Now, in the last sitting week, Parliament has gone into extended sitting time to pass some legislation, and there's so much to cover. So we've decided today we're going to sit there and do the Order Paper under urgency, which is where the candidates, not candidates, we do two shows. So we're doing one today at 3 o'clock today for the appropriation bills. Then we'll get to the juicy stuff tonight at 8 o'clock, being the more important stuff. So let's get to the panel screen. Let's introduce our panelists for the urgency special. No, we don't want that one. That one there. So we've got Blake, Laura, and Eric. How is everyone today?
Hello.
Thank you, yes.
Good, thank you.
Good. Hi, Blake, and hi, Laura.
Hey, Eric.
And yes, and we also like to sit there and say hello to our audience members who are watching at our bit of an earlier time today. It was like, well, when do you do it? So it's, it's getting there. So how's everyone's week been before we get to the nitty-gritty stuff?
Interesting. I've enjoyed going through watching some of this stuff. It's been interesting.
Will we end up be talking about Penny Simmons and making waffles?
No, you'll be talking. You'll be talking about Louise quite a lot. So, wait.
Talk about Louise a lot. Okay. Well, now, just before we get to the nitty-gritty stuff, we do have a random thing that has happened in Parliament. These are the things you pick up when you sit down there and look at things. So, let's get to the fun part of... there we are. So, an unusual event happened with voting in Parliament today. So let's kick it off and let's see what Simeon has to say. And the unusual part that happened.
Number one, in regards to the supplementary question from my colleague Stuart Smith, and ask that you reflect on whether or not that his question should have been allowed to continue. Our view is it was in line with the primary question.
Well, it's effectively questioning a ruling, which is never a wise thing.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
Do you have another
Speaker.
point of order?
Yes, I would like to move that the sitting of the House today be extended into tomorrow morning for further consideration in committee of the Appropriation 2024-25 Estimates Bill, the Recommittal and Reconsideration in Committee of the Gangs Bill and the Sentencing Amendment Bill, to consider Amendment Paper number 111 and consideration in Committee of the Education and Training Amendment Bill.
There's no debate. The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. No. The ayes have it. Party vote is called for. Clerk will conduct the party vote.
New Zealand National, 49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour,
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
14 votes opposed.
ACT New Zealand,
11 votes in favour.
New Zealand First.
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
6 votes against.
Darlene Tana.
1 vote opposed. Oh, you're there. Sorry.
What he said.
Just a minute. Yeah, point of order, the right honourable Mr. Pence. You don't normally take a point of order during a vote, but...
No, you don't normally, but in a circumstances I've never seen before, where two people claim to be casting the same vote, I want to know what's going on here.
Well, I think I can explain it to you. Mr. Stevenson didn't know that Darlene Tana was here, but did have her proxy. So the failure is on him for not having 360 vision around the House. It's now been corrected. The ayes are 68, the noes are 55. The motion is agreed to.
What?
Random shit that happens in Parliament, but I thought that would be something that I think we had to sit there and show what happens when your proxy votes on your behalf while you're there.
That's amazing. We should do more of that.
Yep, so that's just one of them. But more the interesting part was the fact that Winston Peters did a point of order, and then Jerry Brownlee, he explained it brilliantly. His fault was not having 360-degree vision.
That's just a skill issue.
Winston seems to have a point there, because what's the purpose of having a parliament if there is no robust debate? I think later on in the parliamentary discussions, he sort of said that it was kind of rebuked the Speaker of Parliament, like, if you're going to shut us down on any discussions, then the whole purpose of Parliament is for this kind of exciting, robust discussion between the opposition, who brings up the points, and then the debates around it. So if you're going to shut all this down, and
but it's about Darling Tana's proxy vote, not realising that she was in the chamber. But yeah, it was just like one thing was like, oh, okay, whoopsie, that's a mistake. But it was more of like the bit that followed is more what I'm making, which because when Jamie Lee Ross originally was became an independent, New Zealand First ended up getting his proxy vote. So, and something similar like this happened before as well, but it didn't quite end up with a point of order from Winston. So that was more of our fun randomness of what you see in Parliament that you don't always get to see. So that was more of what the point of what that was about was showing, look, this is something unusual.
Do you think Darling Tana is going to start her own political party, or she might do Winston or something?
No, I don't. She don't have the reputation. I don't think she would be able to even get 500 members to start a party.
Yeah.
She doesn't quite have the same charismaticness that Winston has. To be honest, she feels effectively like she came in on the Greens' coattail.
Yeah. Is she under New Zealand law now with the anti-hopping bill?
No, I doubt she'll go
to join any party? Like, is she allowed to join any, like, Winston's or whatever?
Well, no, she's technically, she's made herself an independent.
Yes.
So that's what's happened. But under the waka jumping law, ironically, by Winston's party, if the party chooses to enforce it, they can force her out or force a by-election if they are an elected MP. In the case she's a list MP. Some people could sit there and say indirectly she's doing an Alamein Kopu there, except the only good thing is she hasn't given her proxy vote to vote in favour of the government as what Alamein Kopu did. Kopu, I'm trying to forget its name. It was the Alliance one that left the Alliance Party and then gave her proxy vote to what was known as the Type 5, which actually, ironically, not all the Type 5 actually, when Winston split up, not all the Type 5 actually remained as part of the government. One did actually go with Winston.
Interesting.
But that's effectively, that's what's been said. I mean, the same thing happened with Brendan Horan as well. Yeah, it's definitely going through there. And yes, Kiwi Skirt, completely agree with you. Yeah, she's probably not going to get 500 votes to become an official incorporated party. As Eric would sit there and know, considering didn't your party coattail on freedoms?
Well, I actually go way back. I mean, if you're looking at me now, would you be surprised, or would you all even know? I mean, I'm not sure whether you guys are even born then. In 1996, you're looking at the founder and the deputy leader of the ethnic minority party. That's me. And I started it with another Kiwi, Robert Hub, who was a businessman. And this actually, shockingly, would you believe it, made headlines in the world, CNN, BBC. And why? Because just like women's vote in 1921 was the first time a democracy allowed women to vote, right? That's New Zealand. Yay. the ethnic minority party, which I formed with Robert Ham, and why it created a big hula baloo in the Western democracy and the Asia Pacific was because this was the first time in the whole Western world that there was actually an ethnic minority party, which was a precursor, interestingly, to Maori Party and then Maori Pacific, and so on and so forth. So we were actually like the ones who started it. But interestingly, and this is a whole funny thing, we started it from the fact that all Kiwis, whatever cultures, whatever and religions and agnostics, non-religions and whatever, they're all equal under one rule of law. And we were actually more on the side, of course, respecting the Treaty of Waitangi and the Treaty of Waitangi and its provisions. We were actually not separatists. But do you know what Harold called us? Separatists. And that was the first MMP election. So it was actually a positive iteration of democratic representation, which is, I think it made us the darling of the world because all these Asia Pacific democracies plus the world said, wow, this country is so advanced and so progressive. Let's put all our money here. And today, you look at how many Asian members of parliament there is. In every political party, including the Greens, you see a Chinese MP, an Indian MP, in ACT and in Winston First, New Zealand First Party. Would you ever expect to see an Indian MP? And we were the ones who started it. And just like, anyone who starts something, we receive all the flack, all the things that from left and right, and because we were like, wow, what's this up to? And you won't believe who came to talk to us, all right? Sir Roger Douglas. Face with me, and the first thing he said was, Eric, would you like to join the party? I said, I'm from the everyone equal, and you're asking me to join it. And the other person was none other than Sir John Collins from the National Party. So if I was just thinking about me, myself, and I could have been an MP and a minister because I could have just joined National, they would have welcomed me, I could have joined ACT, right? And that's the journey of life because I stood for what I believe in. And here I am,
Wasn't that also in the same seat as Helen Clark was standing in 1996 in Aotearoa?
Yeah, I stood against her, actually.
Yeah.
And she was very angry, and she said, you're not going to take away our minority votes. And then Robert Ham said something stupid, and he said, we have the minorities have no faith in you, and Helen threatened to sue him. It was that big. That was how... But we fast track today, Mike, 28 years, we have progressed. Just like, today we even have a Maori party. And here am I, I'm the guy who maybe have started that whole process, but ironically from a center-right perspective, that all are equal under one law. But, there you go. But today, we see the same thing happening, unfortunately, with the, what's the name of David Seymour wanting to have that Treaty of Waitangi Principles Bill. But I can see what he means, because he's trying to say, if you don't have this discourse and discussions, right, like what we're all having now, different points of view, and yet we respect each other, we can walk away, we can agree to be different and have different opinions, where would be our democracy? So it allows a wealth to take off all the angry steam. And if you keep suppressing it, like what happened to Maori, you have today all the bitterness you can hear in Parliament, all the hatred.
We're going to have to start moving on now, otherwise I'm going to have to put the filibuster banner popping up down the bottom.
So it's have this...
now, Laura, did you go watch the Education Committee of the House Appropriations?
No, I didn't. I ran out of time.
Okay, and I'll be honest, I haven't. Who do you think will be interesting? I'm looking at the start of the list. We've got Jean Tinetti.
Don't know. I don't know who's going to be the most interesting.
To a few questions that I have for you, Minister, around learning support. And we heard during the Select Committee hearings that overall learning support for this budget had reduced by $5.449 million from the previous year. And we do know that there is probably the number one issue that is facing schools on a day-to-day basis at the moment. Certainly, I'm sure that you hear what I hear when you go around schools, that the number of complexities has increased with our young people coming through the school gate, and that teachers are feeling like they are not getting the support that they used to have. And so, as Vote Minister, I want to know, get a sense. So I've got a few questions. So the first would be a sense that you made decisions around, as the Vote Minister, around what was in and what was out with your team. And you talked about some of the areas and priorities that you had. You had $153 million for charter schools, whereas the research is very questionable around the effects of charter schools for our young people. I want to know how you can reconcile that allocation with the urgent need for funds for students with existing gaps in their learning.
Can I just make mention of the fact that the Minister's here for her portfolio, so she's not expected to be answering questions that actually sit in somebody's
that's exactly
portfolio.
right, Madam Chair, which is why I'm asking, when she came to make those decisions, how she could reconcile that. So she is the Vote Minister overall, and so that's why I'm asking this question around making those decisions that she needed to make those decisions around learning support. The other area, Minister, that I'm quite keen to get an understanding of is the cuts that happened, that you put an expectation around cuts on the Ministry of Education to reduce by, I think it was 7.5% overall spending. And I remember asking during the estimates hearings around those learning support areas that are really incredibly important and evidence-based, such as the delivery of PB for L school-wide in schools, and was told that that would carry on. After that hearing, which was a public hearing, I got an email from people within the Ministry of Education who had not long left, who said that those teams had been disbanded due to, and many of the people had lost their jobs due to those cuts, and had absolutely no belief that that role would be able to carry on, and that the fidelity of PB for L school-wide would be able to continue. So I want to get an understanding from you, as I said, about the choices that you had to make and how you can reconcile those choices with the fact that learning support funding reduced over that year, and B, how those really important programs that do make a difference in young people who do have a complexity of needs can carry on with the fidelity that they are supposed to be delivered with when cuts are happening within the Ministry of Education.
Madam Chair. Honourable Erica Stanford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I'd like to thank the member for her questions, because everybody knows that learning support in education is one of the greatest challenges, and if I'm being perfectly honest, in my 6 priority areas is the most difficult, and I'm sure that the previous minister would agree it is one of the most difficult problems to solve in education, which is why it's one of my priority areas, and we've got quite a big work program underway.
Very sorry to interrupt you, Minister, but we can't hear you very well.
I apologise. I'll try and move that closer, and I'll speak louder.
Is that better?
I'll start again. I said I just wanted to thank the Minister for previous Minister for her question, because I know that she's passionate about learning support, as am I, which is why it's one of my 6 priority areas, and I just wanted to acknowledge that it is, if I'm honest, one of the most difficult areas to solve. The reason for that, as I've discovered, has been there's very little access to any solid data for me to make decisions on. When I asked the Ministry to provide information on what's working, what resources are working, evaluative frameworks on some of the contracts that we've got running, in the last little while at least, we haven't been collecting that data. So to make informed, evidence-based decisions on what works best when you're dealing with a $1.2 billion spend is really tough to do. At the budget, we made some commitments around the $15 million extra for high health needs. We've also invested in Tier 2 supports for structured literacy. Also on the front line, and I know that the member is always interested in some of the the reprioritisations that we made in education, but I was always very clear with the Ministry that that was not to affect frontline, and also, more importantly, not to affect learning support. And in fact, over the last little while, over to August, in fact, so this is from the end of June to the end of August, and we've increased numbers ourselves. There's an additional 100 FTTEs in learning support, so that's 6 curriculum leads, 3 leadership advisors, 85 learning support roles, including 10 early intervention teachers, 19 speech language therapists, 10 school-wide practitioners, 20 intern psychologists, 13 13 educational advisors and other roles, including advisors for deaf children, advisors on deaf children, physiotherapists, occupational therapists and psychologists. I made it very clear to the Ministry that when we were going through this exercise, that frontline was to not be touched, but when it came to learning support, and especially those curriculum leads, that we were going to make sure we increased the numbers. So that was very clear. But I want to go back to the broad...
I think we got a gist of what Erica's trying to say, but does it feel a bit of a...
I thought she was reciting a Christmas list there. It's like, on the third day of Christmas. Yeah.
What I would say...
The frontline staff, is it? Or the backroom staff, a bit confused. Because you need the front line and you need the back room too, right? I mean, without the back room, there'll be no front line. I mean, let's be honest about it. You need the back room staff too. They are the ones who do all the dirty work behind while you look good in front. That's bad. You have all the strategies who do all the running around, the PAs or the MPs, and then they say something sweet and nice, and they look good, right? But it's those people behind the scenes. So I think we still need both. We still need the backroom staff. We still need the frontline staff. But how do you balance it? I think that's the thing.
Yeah. Go ahead, Blake, because you were about to say something there.
Yeah, sorry, Blake.
What I would say is, for someone that has siblings that go to a special support school, and we can get more into this a bit later on, as well, they're actually sneakily under that. Some of those freezers for some of the disability ministries at the moment, where they're actually not allowed to hire too many people at the moment, so they're actually short-staffed. So they can't give the support if they don't have enough staff, which is something the minister fails to mention here, which isn't too surprising.
It seems to me that allocating a ton of money into charter schools may not be a great idea.
And are they going to actually have, specialty schools like what Blake went to, what Blake's siblings currently go to, as a charter school?
Yeah.
And I do believe Zulu Kilo Papa India Golf is going to be landing at Wellington Airport if that day did happen.
I mean, charter schools can be good. I mean, what do you think about the good side of charter schools that they do have like stronger civic lessons, moral lessons, and positive moral values. I mean, some have that. So, it can be helpful. I mean, it can kind of give a sense of what we call security. I mean, for those who come from families that's gone through lots, well, like the ones were warriors, kind of as a hyperbole, and so I mean sometimes these positive moral values do help. So I'm not very clear why the left is so against charter schools. Because is it because the formal school have more Politburo control or something like that, or
they've been known to if you are an excelling student, they take you greatly, but if you're not excelling, you're often left behind struggling because the profit of a charter school's aim is profit driven, but education should not be profit driven, and that is where a lot of balances and values go in there. Is when you're using what should be a not-for-profit model put into a profit-driven exercise, you're going to end up with some perverse results coming out of it. And that's the thing there. It's like if you're high needs, people tend to go, oh, well, you cost too much. Oh, we'll expel you, we'll boot you out of the school and palm you off to the state sector to fix to continue the job, which can be destabilising, especially if you are in a school and you're chopping and changing because, you're deemed too difficult or something like that. So that is where a charter school can fail someone. And also the other one is you have the right under the the Education Act to go to your nearest school to where you live. That is a right you have. But if that right suddenly becomes a charter school, that becomes very complex and confusing because you may not want to necessarily go to that charter school, or that charter school is great if you are in the 80% that follow things properly. But if you're in that 20% that don't, that need just that little bit extra help or a slightly different teaching method, you could be potentially left behind. And and the other one that has also been brought up there is that charter schools aren't necessarily the teachers don't have to be qualified. Now, the other thing I want to know is, do the teachers have to be sit there and criminally checked to make sure they're not a sexual predator?
Well, I don't know about that, but one other point I'd like to make before we move on is that as someone that got to experience mainstream school and special schooling in my schooling life, is what I found, and this was a particular reason why I ended up moving to specialised schooling, is it goes back to what you were saying, Sam. They will put, if you were disabled, they will put you in the too hard basket if you're in a mainstream school. However, what I don't like about the excessive governments, and some of you may agree, some of you may disagree, is special schools have always been under-supported. Even when I was there, they've always been under-supported, and they never have enough staff. And this isn't just a right thing. This was a left thing as well. They seem to forget a lot about special schools a lot of the time, and a lot of special schools have to go into their own budgets, which I don't think is very fair.
And actually, you've made a good point there. Now, Auntie Joanne, my American auntie, that was one of the jobs she had in there. She had a colleague who went to New Zealand from Melbourne to sit there and do it. She was at what was a very highly resourced special, school versus a normal school. Her colleague went to New Zealand to try and get into the same profession because he wanted to go to New Zealand to sit there and do things. He was a year later back at the same school at his old job in Melbourne because he could not cope with the under-resourcing of New Zealand schools. They just weren't up for the job. So that's something that is quite intriguing about the, of the different schools out there. And I know one who actually thrived better in mainstream than special school as well, but he was in a very different situation to Blake. He should have been put into a mainstream school from secondary school. He should have not been held at Kepimana school until I think it was fifth form, or year 11 for those younger people. So that was something in there. So I've seen an extreme where it's gone the other direction, but you are right, it goes both ways. Like in your situation, that probably is where you would have thrived the best.
The biggest problem I have with charter schools is the lack of community participation, because they don't have a community board. They're not obligated to have one.
They don't have to have board of trustees.
Yeah. I do have. Wasn't a community board that they don't have to have? I have to check.
It will be board of trustees.
Yeah.
A board of trustees would be the official designation, whereas a public school has to have a board of trustees that's elected. Even that it's a bit of a convoluted way, but often a lot of people are elected unopposed, and you only need to be elected by. You only have to be nominated by one person who has a child at that school, and you can self-nominate.
Yep. Would any of you agree that it's not just a right side problem? That it's
it's an overall problem. It's not just one side of politics.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that is something we completely agree with. There, it's a problem across all sides of politics. Now, should we move to housing and get as what do you call it? I would call the biggest hypocrite in the world, but some people think she's the biggest saviour, Tabitha Paul, on housing.
Okay. Yeah, is that working out? Cool. Kapai.
If someone can fix the microphones, Tabitha Paul.
Cool, thank you. Just firstly, extending our condolences to the Minister of Housing. The first question that I have is around state housing and kainga order, starting with asset maintenance for kainga order. I understand that the government has planned to cut $1 billion for kainga order towards asset and maintenance and staffing over the next 4 years, which makes me ask the question, what impacts will those cuts have for the people living in kāinga order housing, acknowledging that in Sir Bill English's review, he noted that over the next 2 decades, significant investment will be needed in maintenance and renewals of state housing? And in terms of those staffing cuts at kāinga order, what impact will that have on tenants who rely on KO support staff? And I just wanted to, for context around those questions, bring attention to the Minister that respiratory illnesses are now the 3rd leading cause of death in Aotearoa, and researchers have attributed some of that to poor quality housing. And we know that a lot of our state housing does not meet healthy home standards. So how are we supposed to get our state housing stock up to standard and make sure that it's healthy when there's been over $1 billion worth of cuts? My next questions in regards to kāinga order is around the 300 public housing projects, large-scale projects that have been paused indefinitely. And my question is, when will we know the status of those projects and when they will continue? An example of a major large-scale project in my electorate, Wellington Central, is the Arlington Apartments, which has had $48 million put into it and was going to fund 350 new homes in a city where there are over 3,000 people waiting for homes. I'm not sure where they're going to go, and we are relying on that project to be built. So can the Minister offer any assurances that those 300 projects will remain and whether they will be built, given the need is definitely there? My next lot of questions are around emergency housing and the changes to eligibility that the Minister has led, the Associate Minister has led. And obviously those changes in emergency housing are saving $350 million, but the downstream impacts of people not being able to access emergency housing means that more people will be homeless, as the Minister was advised by MSD officials. So my question is, are those cost savings worth increasing homelessness? And what is the point of reducing access to emergency housing numbers by putting people on the streets? And I just have one other question that was brought up when Q&A looked into emergency housing over the weekend. 20% of those people in emergency housing who have left emergency housing are unaccounted for. We don't know where they've gone. Does the Minister have any more information about where they've gone? And what proportion of the people who have left emergency housing have simply been moved into boarding houses? That is a question that I have around emergency housing. The next point that I want to raise is around homelessness. I want to understand whether the government, since they have cancelled the Homelessness Action Plan, how they are going to account for the massive levels of homelessness that will happen due to all of the cumulative decisions that the government has made around bringing back no-cause evictions and tightening the eligibility for emergency housing and the lack of public housing supply increase. Will the government commit to renewing a homelessness action plan, or at least having a plan towards addressing the consequences of their decisions? And finally, does the government have any data around women experiencing homelessness? Yeah, there is no publicly available gender data on homelessness, who is experiencing and how they're experiencing it. So I want to understand whether the Minister
who recently passed away. There's a number of take or kaupapa that have been raised, and let me just go through them one by one, but opening with the statement that we are absolutely committed to making sure we have a sustainable and enduring state housing sector or state housing provision. We are really focused on getting a number of things back on track, and certainly state housing sits within and across a whole housing ecology or ecosystem where everything needs to work together and in sync. And what we found is that the ecology of the ecosystem of housing when we arrived was not necessarily working in sync. So yes, there have been some tough choices made about savings across housing and urban development, particularly around kāinga order, but also across other aspects of the system. For example, mention of the emergency housing savings over the next 5 years. Certainly some of the initial consideration to asset management and savings that would be made through better asset management over time and asset maintenance were made. Some of those conclusions were drawn well before we arrived in office, and there was an ongoing program within kāinga order to consider how they could better manage and maintain the asset. So some of those musings and directions were actually forming well before we turned up. In terms of healthy home standard, yes, we are committed to that, and over 99% compliance in the kāinga order portfolio. There are a number of projects that have been put on pause or on hold, and we consider those, especially given the fiscal responsibility that we undertake as the coalition government. In terms of Arlington, again, it's sort of in that category. We're considering all options. Nothing, I understand, has been decided as yet on the Arlington, but we're considering that project, and that will come up along with a number of other matters in the next few months. You know, what we are really focused on is making sure more houses, more new builds and new housing is built, not only for those that need some government tautoko, actually, but for all New Zealanders. And some of that provision, actually most of that provision, will come through private development rather than state housing development. We're trying to make sure that the conditions are in place where we can encourage that. Just in terms of net housing, I'll just get through the IRS and kāinga order questions, and then I'll come back to emergency housing. Over the next couple of years, we are foreshadowing over 5,400, nearly 5,500 state homes will be built. However, there will be a net build of just over 2,500, 2,650 net homes will be built. In terms of the IRS places, as people will know, we were envisaging 1,500 new RRS places to be contracted, specifically with community housing providers over the next couple of years. 500 to get going quickly to maintain some sort of momentum, and 1,000 through a bit more strategic partnerships in specific areas where the needs are high. In terms of the Kāinga Order review, again, we're very clear about the conclusions that were drawn out of that review, and what a great review it was, might I add, which identified some unsustainability in the funding and financing of Kāinga Order, and also a need to drive more transparency and credibility around state housing delivering on the needs of New Zealanders who need state housing. So those were ultimately the two key findings, and there were some recommendations that came out of that, and you've seen a refreshed Kāinga Order board as a result. Can I turn to emergency housing, because that's quite a topical matter, and I think we can all attest that emergency housing over the last few years has been a financial, moral, fiscal and cultural catastrophe. And at the peak, of course, over 5,000 households in emergency, and when we arrived it was about 3,342. But our goal in emergency housing is to reduce that number of households by 75% to about 800 households by 2030, and we are getting back on track and reaching that goal. We are focused on making sure that emergency housing can support those with a genuine need for short-term stay and temporary accommodation. And the data shows that we now know where 80% of people exiting emergency housing go to. When we arrived, we knew where 50% were going to. Now we know where 80% are going to. But can I say that people exiting emergency housing do not have to tell us where they are going, but we are 30% better knowing 30% more on where they're going. Kia ora. Anna Williams.
And I'd say, before I go on there, good questions, Tamitha. You got it right on this occasion.
And can I answer that? Because the issue had to be about the $2.9 billion that the previous government under Labour spent, promising to build 100,000 Kāinga Ora homes, and end up only building like less than 1,000.
I think it was 10,000 builds.
Well,
not,
maybe
not 100,000, 10,000.
But look, mate, it was very much less than, and 2.9 billion is like, where did the money go to? I mean, they should have an audit. Like, I mean, we don't want to assume wrongly, but has it gone somewhere? You know, for someone's election chances? But it's very concerning. That's a huge sum. That's like maybe. Well, I mean, you know, it's like, can be 200,000 houses. And where did that money go to? Consultants to discuss where or how to build the houses, to make it green? Or
I mean, I do know that there's been some new Kāinga Ora houses have been built in Newtown here. And many of them would fall into eco-home territories, which are designed to have low energy usage. So that the tenants in there aren't having to say, you know, you might have an income-related rent house, but you might have a house that has a skyrocketing power bill in order to keep it warm. And that was designed that the healthy homes, so that the tenants that are in there don't end up in places like the hospital, so that all the new builds are up at a very high standard. And I do know that the local Kāinga Ora, Newtown Residents Association, which I better let everyone actually know that I'm the new treasurer of the Newtown Residents Association. So that is something that has happened. We do have a contact through Kāinga Ora, and which is Josh Clark. And he does, fill us in with the different things there of the different projects of what's going on there. But we've also heard Arlington's been a big thing that the Newtown Residents Association has been trying to push for to happen, because which has now been put on hold. And see, that was one that was meant to, solve, provide a lot of, I think Tamitha said there 350 houses, and some of them were also meant to be supported living situations for problematic people, so that they have an on-site manager who can sit down there and deal with things, so you can get things before the problems escalate to the point where the police turn up or something like that. Or they just need someone who can probably just keep an eye on them, say hello. If they're distressed, they talk, they keep them in a more functionable state than being in a crisis situation. So that was Arlington. That was one of the things there. The Wollaston Street flats in Mount Cook, which are in Tamitha's electorate, because that's on the other side of the boundary, but does have that supported living part in there, where they do have on-site managers to help keep those difficult people, high needs, who are drug addiction, alcohol, to keep them at their next step of remaining being clean after the rehab aspect.
That's good to hear. So great to hear you're a treasurer. And what you say, it could be helpful, because I had this experience myself coming back to New Zealand in MIQ, right? And, you were literally having to stay wherever you had to stay. And I was trying to be like starting a residents association in this apartments in Auckland Central, Empire Apartments. Used to be for uni students, but none came because of COVID. And it was becoming like what you said, like people were smoking cannabis and selling drugs below, and there were kids running around, and you know, and it was not safe for kids. So I said, let's have a residents committee. And as I went to the counter, and then I said that, and I think they must have heard me. And they sent one guy who followed me up to my 15th floor with like a gold chain, like a typical, I don't know, drug gangster guy. And he told me, "Hey, mate, I just came out from jail." I said, "Yes, so what?" You know what I was in jail for? I killed a police officer. I said, "Well, are you trying to threaten me?" I used to be a drug rehab officer, which I was in Singapore. So, this was the kind of condition that you have working people, professional people like, me, I'm an academic, living with. And so your residential thing is great because you kind of talk to them and, this was the kind of situation. So I think that there is room for that, to have that kind of more security measures. So don't you see that the current government's anti-gang task force is good in that it does clamp down on crime? I mean, recent reports have shown that crime has gone down by 22%. I mean, that's great. I mean,
that's in Auckland CBD, but in our areas around Auckland CBD, it's actually gone up. So you've just pushed the problem outside the CBD ring.
Right, but if it's inside CBD, wouldn't that be dangerous for the tourists and people like us who go around and wanting to enjoy the city of sales and and apart from
I would have called it a more recent time the city of house sales, but yes. I mean, for Frosty who's out there, no, we don't have a YouTube partnership program yet. We've only got 191 subscribers. We need 500 subscribers and 3,000 hours. The hours, on the other hand, look like they're going to get there soon. The subscribers are our difficult part there, Frosty. But you can always put it into our Kiwi-Bird bank account, which I've given you our bank account number there, which I will just put up on the screen. Late fee. It's like, there's our bank account number for the late fee.
Aotearoa, right? Tomato Paul was talking about action plan. Again, is the habit of the left. Sorry for saying this, forgive me. Always having plans and strategies, ideas, but never getting it done, like fixing the
I mean, that's a thing.
Nothing was done until Simeon Brown said, let's fix it.
Yeah, I mean, COVID was a problem.
Well, I worked 4 years as an insurance broker, driving like 1,000 kilometers from Hamilton, right, to Kaitaia, to Keri. Heaps of potholes. I mean, if you hit one and you make a mistake, that's the end of you. If a truck hits you from behind or if a truck hits a pothole. So, I mean, the point is like, I think, one may be sincere, but one may be sincerely wrong. And the way to hell is paved with good intentions. The Labour has all these, decision-making committees, caviar and cheese and wine and cheese and discussions, and every consultant get paid $500,000 for. Should we have a cycle with you? But it's all great. It's all clean.
What's cheese and wine got to do with housing? I like cheese and wine, but what's that got to do with housing development?
I mean, that's the whole thing. You waste so much time talking about it, but not getting it done. And
maybe we need to get Jonathan Hunt to sit there and be in there, since he used to be nicknamed the Minister of Cheese and Wine.
And now the right comes in and get it back on track. I mean, PM Luxon is getting it back on track. And
while removing the train tracks.
He's getting it back on track by making cuts. I mean,
removing the train tracks and letting the wheels run on the sleepers.
Well, I mean, Louise Upton was saying actually that 95% of those on MSD help are all on the green light. That means it's just the 5% for whatever reasons. And one of them was like, you see, from 18 years old to 45, that's the peak of your life. They could have opted to study and get student allowance. They could have opted to do a certificate for building, plumbing, but they were straight on to the government help and then just didn't do anything about it.
Well, you've been beyond student allowance. You're still technically on government help.
Exactly, but at least you are building up your education. So there were so many avenues that our previous governments, Labour too, credit to them, where credit is due, and national that allows them this hope.
Yeah.
It's a real shame. It's a real shame that National cut fees-free first-year tuition, because that would have been nice to get people through the door to study building and plumbing.
Yeah, and there are many certificates that you could do, but people just don't do any. They don't even look for, work. I mean, if you're 18, I mean, if you gave me a chance to be on student allowance, I mean, I had to pay my way and study in Australia. I had to work 4 days a week as an overseas student. But I mean, you guys have a great thing where you can even just, which uni should I do? Which studies should I, like that. And they didn't want to study, and they are on the government help for 30 years.
Yeah. Now, Laura, did you look up anything about the government?
Lose a job or something. It's
still going.
I mean, we need to stop filibustering, Eric.
I mean, like, there are many courses, right? I mean, like, look, there is that. I'm just using a few, like plumbing. I mean, there are heaps of courses that you could go to at your age, which you all have done, so obviously, and you have all your educational backgrounds. But, here we are. I mean, we are talking about those who, not that they couldn't or didn't have the opportunity, but didn't want to. I mean, we don't assume that they belong to gangs and then whatever, but, what do you think of that? I mean, do you think that they could have just chose to upgrade themselves? Or?
Well, we haven't quite got onto social development yet. That one was housing. Okay, when we get to social development, that would be a great place to put it. Now, we've got local government. Did you end up looking up anything on local government?
Oh, God. No. Unfortunately, I just ran out of time.
Yeah, but housing is also a point.
Let's see how far we get first.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think, because we're seeing, what's it called? The names keeps popping up as Rachel Boyack, Deborah Russell, Julian Genter, Rachel Boyack, obviously the Minister Simeon Brown, because he's answering the questions. And I don't know if there's anything. Actually, that was a low polled one anyway, so let's just skip off and move on to climate change. Now, I know you've actually read into that, Laura. Who had some good questions? Holly Swarbrick?
Well, I'm going to say the person who had the best questions probably has to go to Dr. Megan Woods.
Okay.
So should we kick off with Megan Woods?
Yeah.
About what is happening in terms of climate mitigation. We've seen across both the pre-Christmas mini-budget and the budget that was delivered in May that we've seen over $3 billion cut out of climate funding. And there are obvious implications for this. And we have a series of questions for the Minister around that. One of the first questions that I have, however, for the Minister is it's recently been reported that the Minister has talked about how he and the Prime Minister have been signing a series of MOUs while on their international journeys with other countries around what our international efforts around climate change may be in terms of us funding our obligations through offshore credits. And I just wonder if the Minister can give us some more updates on that in terms of the countries that those MOUs have been signed with and whatever conversations have been occurring in terms of the cost of credits under those schemes and what kind of costs that New Zealand will be facing. Because, of course, Madam Speaker, one of the things that we're very aware on this side, that while we're seeing that over $3 billion worth of cuts to climate funding has meant there's been a corresponding and unsurprising cuts to the number of greenhouse gas emissions that we will be abating here at home. And every kilo of carbon dioxide or its equivalent that we do not reduce by domestic abatement is something that we're going to have to pay another country to do. So I'd be interested to know from the Minister what the value of that put on. The second question that I have for the Minister is around the recently released information that we've seen in terms of the climate impacts report that went with the budget 2024, that we saw what the emissions, the increase in emissions that were associated with the package of measures that were presented in the May budget. The question I have for the Minister was this additional to the the climate impact assessment and the obvious emissions increases that occur through the mini budget? So is it a plus, or is it included in terms of both the mini budget and the May budget? Be very interested to know on those two very specific points. We would also be very interested to have more information from the Minister around plans to remove public sector carbon neutrality goals, what the climate implications of this will be in terms of the carbon reduction. We know that the money for the state sector decarbonisation fund that our government established was scrapped in the May budget in terms of the scrapping of the SURF budget, but what are going to be the emissions implications of that measure? And Mr Speaker, I just wonder also whether the Minister has had conversations with some of his colleagues across Cabinet, such as, for example, the Minister of Education, that one of the things that we know that the work that we were doing in terms of emissions reductions and taking out coal boilers, particularly in our schools, was not only reducing our emissions, but it was having huge impacts on school OPEX budgets, that it's much cheaper to heat your school with electricity than it is with coal. So whether or not that he has been working with his colleagues around the savings across a variety of communities, not least households, that will occur by scrapping a number of the initiatives. I'd also like to know from the Minister whether it is still his intention that the ETS drives most of the change that we need to see, particularly in industrial and process heat. Obviously in the budget, or the mini budget, we saw that the Giddy Fund was scrapped, and whether the Minister still considers that the ETS can do that lifting on its own, and if so, what does the price of carbon need to be to drive that change? What advice has he received around that? Also interested to know from the Minister what has happened to the rate of industrial decarbonisation since the scrapping of the Giddy scheme. How is the government tracking what projects are taking place, and how are they calculating both what the emissions reductions are and the marginal cost of abatement? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Far out, she just went off and going. And the thing is, Simia didn't even answer immediately. It got palmed off to Chloe. So shall we go, Chloe?
Yeah, go, Chloe.
Chloe Swarbrick.
Madam Speaker, look, I want to continue in the frame that my forebear, the Honourable James Chuah, in the climate change space did with regard to reaching out for a sense of cross-party consensus on the challenges that we face as a country and indeed as the world. But, Madam Chair, it must be noted that Friends do not let Friends knowingly decimate the scientific fundamentals necessary for life on Earth. And what it is that we are grappling with, as well canvassed at Scrutiny Week in front of the Environment Select Committee, is a draft emissions reduction plan that this government knows will increase emissions based on what the track had been under the prior government. And I think it's really important to note that while the Minister and indeed the Prime Minister has been trumpeting the fact that they appear to be relatively on track, with a number of variables quite difficult to pin down and the data difficult to in fact look at meaningfully, that in fact the Climate Change Commission's the Climate Change Commission Emissions Reduction Monitoring Report, the first of its kind, debuted this year, and what that did was signal a warning bell for the fact that actually what we are potentially looking at as a result of the intentional decisions made under this government to wind back some of the most successful climate change and mitigation policies is that we are potentially going to be off track to meet emissions budget 1 out to next year, to 2025, demonstrably off track. This government should pay attention to. We also have a situation whereby the Climate Change Commission, I understand, that has put it very frankly to pretty much anyone who will listen, that a tree planted this decade will not sequester carbon this decade. Yet what we have in the draft emissions reduction plan from this government is effectively a waving the hands in the air and saying we're not going to care about stopping pollution at the source. So I would really like for the Minister to provide us with some certainty and some concrete answers to whether the government has simply just given up on gross emissions reduction, if it is simply going to rely on market mechanisms, the likes of the ETS, which in its own draft ERP says is going to cost far more, approximately 4 times as much money for the poorest New Zealanders than it will for the wealthiest. So that's to note that not only are they knowingly increasing emissions, they're also knowingly exacerbating inequality. How's that? Who's this economy really working for? Further to that, we have a government that is pursuing, under its ACT National Coalition Agreement, a smokescreen on climate delay, that being the new denial, on so-called no additional warming. So I would really like to understand how the Minister is factoring in any potential outcomes that comes from his ministerial working group with ministers in agriculture into what the final emissions reduction plan actually looks like, and whether there will potentially be any changes to our targets or our goals as a result of that pseudo-scientific nonsense working group that he has decided to set up. I also think it's really important that we dig into some of the projections on the ETS revenue in particular. Madam Chair, I made the quite flippant point, but in fact it's now bearing out to be relatively true in our Scrutiny Week hearing, that perhaps one of the most effective climate policies that this government could be pursuing is creating so much uncertainty inside of the emissions trading scheme that auctions will continue to fail to the extent that all of those units are cancelled at the end of this year. So I'd like to ask the Minister whether he sees that is going to potentially be the case, that we are going to see those ETS auctions fail out to the end of this calendar year, and as a result, all of those units ultimately cancelled. And hey presto, look, he has been pretty effective as far as that goes, although probably not that being his intention. But more so than that, that poses a massive issue for the government's revenue projections. Notably, each each ETS auction is worth approximately $700 million. And this government has made the decision not to ring-fence or hypothecate that revenue for the likes of the Climate Emergency Response Fund, as occurred under the last government, but instead to take that revenue and put it back into the pot for generalised tax cuts, which, guess what, will also disproportionately benefit the wealthiest in this country. So, Madam Speaker, my questions for the Minister primarily relate to that point around no additional warming and whether he is factoring in any potential changes to the ERP or to our climate goals or otherwise, what projections when it comes to ETS revenue, and whether he sees that system will be improved, and also, if I may, to sneak in that point around our NDC constructive liabilities and whether he's taken any further advice on that issue.
Far out. She was on.
You can see. You can see why I got stuck researching a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
Because it was like. Okay, so I know a thing or two about trees. I've worked in forestry. I gotta address this now. Chloe, unfortunately, you're wrong about the trees. A tree planted this decade can sequester carbon, but it will not sequester enough carbon. It will not act as a carbon sink. So our forests sequester about 20 million tonnes of CO2 each year. So according to the MPI, as of 2022, 38% of our land is covered in forest. So 8 million hectares of that is native forest, and 2.1 million hectares of that is plantation forest. Based on the climate change forestry regulations of 2022, a newly planted native forest will absorb about 40 tonnes of atmospheric CO2 per hectare over 10 years. So that's what I got to talk about here. Is she's saying a tree planted this decade will not sequester carbon. Based on the data, it will, just not enough. So 40 tonnes of atmospheric CO2 per hectare over 10 years. So that's for your native forest. Whereas a hectare of radiata pine, I can see Blake. Whereas a hectare of radiata pine can absorb about 219 tonnes of carbon dioxide per hectare over the same period. So you might think, this is awesome, let's plant a whole bunch of radiata, right? Let's plant a whole bunch of Christmas trees. Well, the problem with that is that you're going to end up with a lack of biodiversity and shallow root systems. So what tends to happen in that case is in areas where that gets a lot of rainfall, the trees just fall over, right? They end up sliding down the hill. It's a real pain in the ass to deal with.
A lot of that happening in the Aotearoa.
Yep, a lot of that happening.
You can actually thank Lily from Big Saves Family Trust buying up a whole heap of farms to keep them into doing animal grazing.
Right. Well, Anita, I was saying that we are actually also looking into the positive side of things in that I think what the Honourable Simon Watts, the Minister of Climate, is doing great was recently, did you see in the Facebook...
Answer the question yet. Do you want him to answer the question?
I was going to answer the question in an indirect way to share that they are now...
Otherwise, we don't know what you're, we don't know what you said yet.
I've got to the point, right? But what I don't understand is why are we wanting to pay, right, 15 billion to that climate fund that you will know better in climate. So I'm asking a question as a Joe Blocks here, is that remember that 15 billion we have to pay on behalf of India or China for the bad irresponsible carbon emissions? What was that 15 billion that we have to pay to the world whatever fund? What was that one? The one that
is that into the climate change?
Yeah, I mean, why should we pay for their irresponsibilities? And we are not rich, you know. I mean, well, okay, we are not bad, but we don't have the trillions that China has.
Well, we're going to get a lot poorer economically if we don't meet our climate obligations internationally. It's going to impact our trade with Europe.
Being like, suckers, because
one of the things
making the irresponsible bad climate stuff, right? We are the goodies, good guys, good girls, who observe the law and even now trying to plant trees to counter the carbon emissions, even having electric boats and all that, and hydrogen trucks that Simon Watts showed in the Facebook post of his. What I don't understand is why we haven't committed ourselves to paying 15 billion to China, who should be paying themselves. They're the ones who are not responsible for their own carbon emissions.
Are you talking about offshore credits?
And that India thing, I mean, they're the ones irresponsible with that. Yeah. Why are we paying
I mean, I would love to save money when it comes to offshore credits. And the way how we do that is we need to electrify a lot of our industries to reduce carbon emissions. That is something we have to do. We have to get away from fossil fuels. It's going to be much better for the economy and much better for the environment the sooner we can do that.
A great example of a clean energy plant is Tiwai Point. That's a great example of clean energy. Now, out in Glenbrook, there is a steel farm which recently was benefit of financially to convert the coal-powered steel mill into an electric steel mill, which is one of the first in the world, which was paid for out of that climate fund. And it was
correct. That was the one that National just asked.
But that was one of the things out of Glenbrook, which if we can bring electric steel, produce electric steel, that means we're pumping in clean, cheap, generally speaking, energy into doing that is renewable, that is also local, which means the money to pay for that energy is not getting exported overseas in profits.
Yeah, the good thing is too is that if we decarbonise across industries, it actually takes a lot of pressure off farmers as well. So there is an incentive there. We've got to help out our farmers by asking energy sectors and transport sectors to go, hey, you need to electrify. Farmers are already doing it rough. They're already broke. They're already worried about the damn mortgage. It's like we've got to ask other industries that are earning tons of profits to do their part.
I think the recent electric boats that are being built now by our own Kiwi industry is great because they will reduce diesel emissions into the sea and reduce pollution. And I saw also the hydrogen electric trucks that will reduce lots of carbon emissions. International is doing quite well to that, isn't it? I mean, in the sense that they are the ones promoting, creating businesses and creating jobs while preserving the environment. I saw what's his name? Tamaputaka, the Minister of Conservation. He spoke in the Hauraki Gulf blue-green event. I was there, and they're now going to try to make Hauraki Gulf like a marine reserve to preserve the reserve.
Because I do know in Wellington, we were the first city in the country to have electric ferries. So the east-west ferries that went across Wellington Harbour were shifted from diesel to electric. I think, there's the two main ferries that go across. I think they still have one diesel that's spare because they used to have three in case one could be out of there. But the two main ferries that go between Eastbourne and Wellington were electric, and Wellington had the first one in there, which were the prototypes, and I do think Fuller's in Auckland, I think they've got the second lot to happen in there, but I won't be able to know which ports they go between A and B.
I'd like to briefly go back to Megan Wood's speech.
Sure.
So this goes back to, again, when I was at school, she talks about this government thing that like green schools aren't viable. But back in 2011, when my former school was built, they decided from the outset, because of the disabled children, that they would not have anything like radiators or anything because of fears of them being burnt or whatever. And as a result, they won green awards for 5 years straight. So,
and they probably also had a reduction of those types of injuries that would have happened compared to other schools that may still actually have some of those things in place.
So to say that, for this government to say that, we need that to make it viable, no, we don't, because having a green award 5 years straight proves that you don't need all these toxic and dangerous gases, especially not just for special needs children, but for schools in general.
Did your school have solar panels?
Yes. Two.
Yeah, because I know a few schools around the country looked at solar panels when the government changed, like it was something to do with if they went over budget, certain bills were automatically paid, and the government stopped funding those over budget things, and one of them was electricity, and a lot of that was around heating.
So 2 quick points. So they were in 2011. They were one of the first green schools in the country, and because they were one of the first green schools in the country, they were getting attention from places such as Japan and Korea, so much so that we had international delegations coming to the school to see it.
Interestingly, yeah, sorry.
And they used solar panels to heat their hydro pool on the roof.
I was just going to say that to add value to what Blake was sharing, a very good point there was that, interestingly, just across the ditch in Australia, I mean, they're doing great in that sense where they allow you to have credits by changing your house to putting solar panels. They have like a discount, and I know that firsthand because in 2011, actually, I was working interestingly for the Department of Climate Change in Australia as one of the customer service staff, and it would be like how much they would get discount to put solar panels. And this was when the Labour Party was in power in 2013 and 2011. And
it was National was in power then. We're talking Australia or New Zealand?
Australia.
Australia. Labour was in power in 2013. Yes, that's right.
And they were quite good in carbon credits, and we were so like specific, and I was in charge of like taking calls, any escalation. Some people say, I want to talk to the Prime Minister. No, and then you listen to all the yarns and the complaints, and it was a great work. But what I find is, I think this is something that both sides agree on. It's just more the how to do it thing on climate, isn't it? So, we have done great in the forestry side, although, yes, we could have done better, and we are getting into the electric stuff. But the point is that maybe we shouldn't be paying that 15 billion to countries that may not be responsible themselves. That 15 billion, we are talking about Aotearoa, getting people into homes.
Houses. They could have some things on the road.
That money shouldn't be given, but should be used for ourselves to get homeless people off the streets into homes. I mean,
I'd love to see farmers pay for planting the trees. That gets to be a bit of a problem when we're buying offshore credits.
Yeah.
Farmers are not benefiting from that.
So what about that 15 billion that we kind of foolishly signed to pay off?
Yeah. We're going to have to start moving. Should we look at health? Who had a chance to look at health in the transcripts?
I just mainly did the disability ones.
Okay. Did Ingrid Leary ask a lot of disability-related questions?
It was mainly Priyanka and Louise arguing.
Okay, so that wasn't definitely in the health part. That would have been in the social development.
Yeah.
Just trying to think, because Ingrid Leary is big on a few things. Or should we do Ingrid Leary, Hohana Linden, or Aisha Verrill?
I saw Aisha Verrill. She was good.
So let's pick up randomly here.
Dunedin Hospital. What I do want to do, though, is continue to make sure that we hear answers on this side of the House that the New Zealand public is entitled to as to the financial performance of its health service. So I want to repeat my question, which has not yet been answered, which surely will be released in official documents at some point, so I don't know why it should not be answered this evening. What was the Q4 result in terms of surplus or loss for Health New Zealand? Now, one of approximately 70% of Health New Zealand's costs are staff, and therefore it is hugely concerning that efforts to cut funding at Health New Zealand will touch on our valued staff, particularly all staff in Health New Zealand are valued, but that side of the House made a particular promise around cuts to frontline services. So returning to our theme of transparency this evening, I do want to ask the Minister, why hasn't there been government comment in terms of net staffing changes at Health New Zealand? Why are we always hearing in response to concerns about nursing staffing that X number of nurses have been hired without saying how many are left? And can he confirm suspicions that have been canvassed in the press multiple times when workers speak out about what they're experiencing, that there is an effort to lower the number of nurses either across the country or in particular services? Because I don't think it serves anyone for this process that is going on at the moment to continue. And just to recount what that is people around the country, frontline health workers, but particularly nurses, are putting up, have had vacancies approved to recruit to, and then they find out that the vacancy is cancelled. We've had instances of them disappearing off the website after they were approved. People are informally told an offer is coming, applicants are told that, and then it doesn't arise. Business cases that were approved are revoked. If we listen to frontline workers, they are telling us their health services being cut. And yet, there is no transparency or confirmation of that from the government. I ask you, Minister, to come forward and say the truth about what is going on. Why so quiet after saying there's a $1.4 billion overspend about what you're actually doing to stop it? We've also heard from clinicians that they are finding vital support staff being offered voluntary redundancy, or in some cases being not being replaced if they take maternity leave or they resign for some reason, which of course in a very big organisation happens continuously. We heard a cardiologist making comment the other day about the fact that he is booking his own clinic. Well, what a waste of time for someone who probably earns over $200,000 a year. And also, what about the value we place on the importance of those people who help patients navigate the health system, like our booking clerks? It seems to me that this attack on staffing in Health New Zealand is well underway, and yet we haven't heard any confirmation from the government about what they're actually doing. The people of New Zealand are entitled to know about what is happening in their health system. Their health workers are desperately trying to tell them every day, and yet officials and the minister just shrug that off, say it's operational, talk about again in the last couple of months, but not actually say what the net change in staffing is. It's time that the government come clean on the issue of their cuts to the health system.
Honourable Pina Hinaro.
Specific to Māori health, in front of the committee, the minister has said that the money that was used by Te Aka Whaiora has simply transferred over into the health team at Health New Zealand. So therefore my questions are very simple. One, can the minister confirm the allegations of delay in contract confirmation for Māori health providers across this country, which has, two, led to them releasing staff and then furthermore being unable to bring them back in to ensure that they can continue the services that they're being contracted for? And three, finally, Madam Speaker, a very specific one about the statement made during the estimates that the minister has transferred that money from Te Aka Whaiora over to where it is, the transparency around that money, what's being used for now, and whether or not there are any delays in reaching the front line for Māori health services.
Madam Chair.
Honourable Dr Shane Ritchie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To answer the first member who spoke, as I've said previously, Quarter 4 report will be released in due course, considering it's only 10 weeks past the end of the quarter. That is a little bit early. Secondly, talking to health workforce, the largest number of nurses ever are currently employed, is what I have been informed. More than 600 nurses were offered jobs in June and July, and I understand a significant number of SMOs as well. To speak to the member and continue to progress some of the Māori health questions, she had a question around immunisation for Māori. Immunisation for Māori still falls variably between 10%, sometimes more, depending on which immunisation you're looking at, for Māori compared to non-Māori, and that is a significant problem. Which is why, before Christmas, we enabled the $50 million immunisation initiative, which uses the things that Hauora Māori can do that mainstream cannot. It goes further, reaches into vulnerable communities where mainstream cannot or will not reach. Very pleased with the success of that program to date. The target was to be 10,000 vaccinations, 33,300 have actually been delivered, and a significant number of vaccines also from the smaller contributor, the direct Hauora Māori providers as well. So that immunisation program is having some benefit. With regard to my colleague around delay in Māori health contracting arrangements, I'm not aware of any, but I will double check that, but I'm not aware of any at this point.
Jenny Marcroft.
Okay.
So, what I'd like to go in with first here is health is one of the areas that I actually, even as a left-sided voter, disagree with Labour on, because they harp on and on and on about the National doing a bad job, but successive governments, including them, have done such a worse job, because they did terrible on the waiting list. They did terrible with the nursing pay. They did terrible with a number of other things. So they can't. I find it difficult when people like AHS stand up there and say, oh, we can do a better job, when they have 6 years to do it. And as somebody who suffered as a result of the waiting list especially, it's quite sad. That's what I've got to add on the health thing. It's more of a personal thing, but
sometimes you need to hear those personal stories. I mean, put it this way: you use the health system a lot more than say I would. Like my last, actual hospital visit that dated in staying overnight was back in 2015.
Yeah.
Was it 2016? which was appendicitis. So that's my last real serious interaction with the health system other than visiting the GP. So whereas I know you've recently been through the health system with hospital, and I know that wasn't exactly pleasant.
Yeah. So it's like for the IHN to stand there and say, oh, they're not doing a good job with this, that, and the other. Well, they didn't. Well, the health system wasn't any improvement under her watch either. So
well, she only had 1 year, but I know what you're saying on there. I mean, I do remember I think we had 4 health ministers over that 6-year period because David Clark screwed up.
So all I'm saying is it's a bit rich coming from her. That's all I'm saying.
Everyone else is quiet.
Yeah, I mean, all I got to say is that we're more than grilling our own side on the barbecue.
Now, is that barbecue? Yes, Howard?
Does anyone agree or disagree?
You caught me, yeah.
Does anyone agree or disagree?
I just want to say that, look, we all love our nation. We love New Zealand. We care for New Zealand. It's just different approaches, isn't it? Like, I know the right and the left just want to tear each other apart, but actually,
some don't.
And it's just...
I'm not really interested in tearing people apart.
It's just like, okay, right, you need to have business people to start businesses, right? And then you have to have directors to run the business. You have to have managers, and then you have to have the workers. Not because it's not, like vertical, right? It can be horizontal. And then today the in thing is horizontal management. And the left can take credit for it, maybe. But it's just a management strategy to be more level. And there's always that dichotomy, the perception, these people are going to exploit us from the worker side of view. And there are some grounds of exploitation, but there are some really good social businessmen who actually, have worked hard from having a small spare parts shop and then grew it until it became so big and employed like 10,000 people. And they even let the workers share in it. So there are people who actually have the social...
You described...
I don't know if we want to get into a capitalism versus socialism debate.
Was a former business neighbour, Alan Chambers. He was one who he handsomely paid his staff. Including, I know one of his staff members was on more than $40 an hour because that's how he felt, because of the work that was brought in and out. That's what he felt was right as part of the reimbursement in the process. Plus, he was also one under the old apprenticeship system before Labor changed it, used to pay all of it out of his own pocket. Out of his own business's pocket, not paying it onto the staff to pay. And he also was given them living wage, not trainee minimum wage, which is 20% lower than minimum wage.
Yeah, my dad was the same when he was working as an optometrist. Man, those receptionists were paid really well.
Wow. And how about those who are given a share in the business? I mean, we hate this person, some of us, from the, like Warren Buffett was a guy who literally gave a share, like literally, like you could have like 10% of.
He gave shares as a part of the remuneration package, which some companies do that in New Zealand, some companies don't.
Yeah, and I think the only thing he actually had, although he was a billionaire, was he was, and I read a book about himself and a biography, and he actually just had a stake, which was his raison d'etre for the day. That was his highlight. He would have his stake every day, and he would be making billions, and many people who put money into his investment firm, Berkshire Hathaway, was making millions, like literally, like after 10 years, that $1 became $1 million. And so this was the kind of a good example of how businesses grow and workers.
I don't know how we managed to get on this from a health portfolio, but okay.
But look, this is for better health, because this is for getting people into work, back on track. I know you don't like the word.
Should we take a look at...
All right, so promote apprenticeships.
Yeah.
Okay,
should we take a look at Rachel Brooking asking our good old friend who waffles, Penny Simmons, in environment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Related to that line of questioning, I'd like to know more about the revised approach to mapping natural hazard zones and various tools that councils can have. So this is important work. It's been going on throughout governments, different governments. The Natural Built Environments Act had stronger natural hazard provisions. There's always been a need for more work in this area and more national direction. So I'm interested if the Minister can comment on that work, please.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With regard to the question from the member from the Green Party about the national direction instruments, I quite agree that they are very much the engine room of our environmental framework, and we have a significant piece of work going on looking at a programme of changes to national direction. We've got clusters of them. We've clustered them into 4 packages: energy and infrastructure, housing, farming in the primary sector, and emergencies and natural hazards. So that work is very important to the work that it will feed into the replacement work, the RMA replacement work in 2025, and it is scheduled to feed into that.
Mr. Chair.
Rachel Brooking.
Going back to the fast track bill and in general all of these pieces of legislation and regulatory change that are coming, how does she and the government intend to maintain transparency and public participation in those decision making processes, particularly for contentious projects?
Well, just very briefly, Mr. Chair, of course, the member asking questions is on the Select Committee and working through the process of the fast track bill at the moment, and nothing has come back yet. It's due back in mid-October, and so I have no doubt that she will make fulsome input into the report that comes back from the Select Committee.
Mr. Chair, well, I'm pleased that the Minister has that faith in me, but the questions here are to her as the Minister and are about what she is doing, and not just in that fast track piece of legislation, but there's a whole lot of other regulations and bills. There's one before primary production at the moment, and there's been press releases about all of the national instruments being changed as well. So where does she see public participation in the resource management system? How important is it to her that community can have a say in the planning decisions that are made around them? Mr. Chair.
Good question.
Looking forward into more resource management change, does the Minister agree with Minister Chris Bishop that property rights are equally as important as heritage protection? And if so, how does that work, and how will the government address cases where economic development interests directly conflict with long-term environmental or heritage values?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair, we have committed to ensuring that there is transparency and there is a process which allows consultation and valuable input. Particularly, our consultation has started with a range of iwi in terms of specific parts of the national changes to national direction, and the Associate Minister may be able to talk a little bit more there, but it's a commitment that we have made to Po Taio that we will certainly engage fulsomely in consultation there, specifically around those freshwater regulations. So the processes that we are working through are the normal processes that you would expect to see in terms of a bill working through.
Well, that felt like question time.
I don't have any more questions to add on to that. I got distracted by my
kids. Oh, okay, yeah. So does that just show how boring it is? And yeah, it was good that our remote editor told me. Okay, Peggy's a bit boring listening at normal speed. Okay, let's get to now. Was it social development where Blake suddenly becomes an expert? Let's see what Carmel says.
Start with the public sector target of reducing the number of job seekers on benefit by 50,000. And I want to discuss the numbers where we're at and where we're forecast to get. Mr. Chair, at the time we had the hearing, there were 14,000 more people on benefit since that minister and her government took office in October. There's now 26,000 more people on benefit. Now, we certainly don't begrudge people who need support through the welfare system. However, it is indicative of an economy that is going backwards and a lack of investment and focus on supporting people into employment. Mr. Chair, I'm concerned, and I have a question for the minister around forecasts. forecasts. At BFU 2024, 202,000 people were anticipated to be on benefit by January 2025. That was when it was meant to peak. But currently, Mr. Speaker, already, and this is from the September 6th data, there are 203,709 people on job seeker support. So if I didn't make it clear, the BFU forecast were job seeker support 202,000 by January 2025 was meant to be the peak, but it's September and we're already at 203,709. I want to know from the Minister whether or not she's received any updated advice or information so that we can share with the public what the new forecasts are, how bad unemployment and the rates of beneficiary uptake are going to be under that government, given that they've already surpassed the forecast that we were given at the beginning. I also want to know, given there are 26,000 more people on benefit since that government took office, how many more children there are living in benefit-dependent households and what that will mean for child poverty and child poverty predictions. Mr. Speaker, a different question, but I'll put it on the table now too. I want to know from the Minister why, given there are actually 30,000 more people on benefit than there were a year ago, why we are seeing food grants down 2,500 now compared to a year ago. So it doesn't seem to make sense that we have fewer people in the welfare system needing hardship support when there is a significant increase of the number of people that are currently in the welfare system accessing benefits. So I want updated forecasts for how bad unemployment and beneficiary uptake is going to get in the country, given how bad it already is, significantly worse than forecast, how many children are living in those households and what the child poverty implications will be, and why there seems to have been a reduction in hardship assistance uptake, despite the fact we see 30,000 more people on benefit compared to a year ago.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I want to take us back to one of the decisions that was made as part of the budget, which was to stop around 900 disabled workers from being entitled to earning at least the minimum wage. Some of those workers are currently earning close to $2 an hour for work that other people, able-bodied people, could be making on the minimum wage. When we were unpacking this policy decision of preventing disabled workers from earning at least the minimum wage to pay for tax cuts, we were told that one of the rationales was the concerns from providers, including potential job losses. And I want the Minister to tell us whether it's true that going ahead with a wage supplement that would have topped up the contributions from employers would have resulted in job losses. If so, how many job losses would we have seen? Because to me, when I read the papers, it just seems like it was a callous cut to actually enable tax cuts, and it had nothing to do about protecting jobs. So can I confirm how many job losses we would have seen if we had gone ahead with the wage supplement, a top up to wages from contributions from employers that would have enabled disabled people to earn at least the minimum wage?
Mr. Chair, I have been reminded to keep my answers short, so I shall. So the first thing in terms of the economic context, I want to repeat what the Prime Minister said in the House yesterday. When you have extraordinary government spending, some of it wasteful, it leads to inflation, it leads to higher interest rates, it leads to a recession, it leads to unemployment. That is the reality of the cycle we are in, and yes, it is worse than Treasury forecast. So the current forecasts is that instead of 202,500 being on the job seeker benefit in January 25, it will peak at 214,000. That doesn't change our target, it doesn't change the work we're doing, and actually what I would like to put on record is that our work exits in July and August this year are 1,500 up on the same time a year ago. So what we're doing is working. I would just repeat for the member, in terms of child poverty, we have an additional 50,000 children growing up in benefit-dependent households. That's the legacy of the previous government. And now 224,000 of those children, 1 in 5, which is reasonably dire. In terms of the next member's question about the minimum wage exemption, I would remind members that the minimum wage exemption predominantly applies for those who are receiving the supported living payment. So they receive a full-time benefit for their disability. And the minimum wage exemption at the moment applies to about 900 people who are able to then be in a workplace or a disability enterprise. And the feedback from the disability enterprises were they didn't put a number on the job losses, but they were very concerned about if the wage supplement was to proceed, it would mean job losses. The member might be interested in one of the pieces of work that we are progressing at the moment, and that is how do we make sure that more who are on the minimum wage exemption that's used as a pathway into the open employment market or further educational training. And that is something that I'm committed to. I'm very clear about supporting more disabled people into work.
Okay, Blake, you fire away.
All right.
We're not hearing anything from you at the moment. No sound at all.
Blake, yeah.
Yeah, we're still hearing no sound, Blake, and we can't even lip read you either because of where your camera is.
Okay, so he's going to be coming right back.
Yeah.
So I'll guess I'll filibuster until he comes back.
That's the expertise of the left, filibustering all the bills like you always do.
Yeah.
Oh, everyone filibusters. Isn't that how it always goes? When you're in opposition, you've got to filibuster.
Yeah.
Winston Peters bragged about filibustering when he was running for the stop at the asset sales bill, and then he complains about it when he becomes a statesman.
Thanks to that, there'll be emergency meetings next week. More yummy stuff at Bellamy's for all the MPs. I love the meals there. I've been there before. It was really lovely. I like David Lange, the meal as well. I'm not sure a steak or something. It was very good. Try it there when you go there. But yeah, that's. But okay, that's jokes apart. The point is that what do you think of those discussions? I think I'll let.
I think Blake can start.
Yeah, I was waiting for Blake to. Okay, sorry, Blake.
I had to duck out because the audio went funny. Anyway, so yeah, luckily I watched this already, so I know what she says. They're all full of crap. So yeah. So yeah, like going back to what Ricardo was saying, the fact that some disabled people only earn under $2 in wage is disgraceful. We should not have discrimination in wage, especially for the disability in this type of country. Yeah. So, yeah, it's not good. And the fact that they're touting benefits are getting better when they're getting worse is not good either.
I mean, the interesting part is the one part that was mentioned on there, Carmel, I wish she did sit there and say was the increase in the number of grants declined. That would be the biggest thing in there. Like grants benefit numbers going up and grants going down. That does raise a bit of suspicion. But if the application number is the same or increasing, but the approval rate dropping, that's when you can sit there and ask questions in there. And is MSD actually doing things properly when they are declining someone, or are they just taking the easy way out rather than properly assessing? Because I know that is something that has been often at MSD is a misunderstanding or something that's not been asked correctly or got taken the wrong way, and MSD runs with it. And sometimes that could be sitting there saying, cash on hand could be mistaken as having available credit on a credit card, which is not cash on hand. But some case managers go, well, you've got $5,000 on your credit card, so why don't you use that before you get a food grant? Even that the law states that it's $5,000 cash in the bank would sit there and decline you that, not a $5,000 credit limit on a credit card that could have a balance at zero or a balance at $5,000.
Yeah, and the thing that gets me is that they say, and this is why I'm concerned about Waikaha being enrolled into MSD, especially because if they don't know how to deal with normal people, with all due respect, how are they going to deal with us disabled people? When it is proven that MSD have a terrible track record with disability.
But they have a track record with anything that goes off a script. You sit there and ask for something script that is off script. Sorry, my script doesn't give me the answer. Sorry, I want the answer. I'm sorry. And you go, if you don't have an answer, phone a friend for help. Next minute, you're on hold, waiting for them going to a supervisor to sit there and have that. And that is a common experience and I'd say it's down to poor training, actually, because, a beneficiary, a recipient should not have to educate a case manager in the Social Securities Act. But often that is the case. And it's very concerning. And it's like Blake sitting there and saying, you're going to sit down there and have a wins case where you go, Blake, you can walk out the door. You don't need a wheelchair. And then that's going to sit down there and go in there, and you have a stupid case manager make that decision. Because that's what happens when you are ill-qualified and ill-intent to sit there and do that, And then, straight away, Blake is going to be stuck there and bed-bound as a result of that stupid case manager make that decision. And hey, what happens when you get things wrong? That's something that, that seems to be something that seems to be with wins, It's inappropriate to ask the case manager to be given a wet bus ticket when they screw up so horribly.
Well, okay.
But you sit down there and between your wages, 1 minute after 5 p.m., you've got to be forced with a debt against your will. So the extremes in accountability are in there. Like, put it this way, working in case managers want the lack of accountability of a king or a queen, of sovereign immunity, but they want every ounce of accountability on a beneficiary, to the point where they want accountability for when the beneficiary does nothing wrong.
Can I just have a take on this, what you're just saying? And good to hear your Correro, very passionate Correro, and that's the whole purpose of having discussions. Now, I was looking more into the more macroeconomic situation that led to the increase of so many more beneficiaries. This didn't happen now. It happened due to the economic principles and policies of the previous government, due to the fact that it actually happened around 2021 to 2, if you recall. Our interest rates was only 2% to buy homes, and the homes was at the highest price, very jacked up, and more and more people were buying because they were afraid they might miss out. This is the typical share marketing where the shares are going high, you got to buy the shares before it goes. And then when they all went in, right, like the little fishes that come in, and then suddenly the whole thing crashes, right? And these are the people
we're going through right now.
Yes, they lost their homes, they lost their deposits, their 400K deposit, the 200K deposits. And then on top of that, the loan then shoots up from 2% to 6%, right? In the official cash rate, which is 8% in the real terms of a bank, any bank. That means they're actually paying an extra $2,000 a month. That wipes out any daily bread. So then they are forced to sell the homes, be unemployed if they're having small, medium businesses, or be unemployed because they can't afford to sustain themselves. And that's why you have that whole block suddenly dropped in on this year. So it comes across as if the national-led coalition are the ones responsible, which the left will try to take advantage and exploit.
One of the other things that is independent of that is the Reserve Governor and the mistake he did in that 2021 August lockdown is he lowered interest rates when he was where the projections was to raise interest rates. So that was one of the places where the mistake went wrong, was when the Reserve Bank lowered the interest rate when the predictions were pre that lockdown announcement being made was to raise them. Now, if they held them at a single point rather than lowered them, it may have sat down there and possibly not sparked the heat up. But I do know in the positive aspect, my predecessor on the Newtown Residents Association, Michelle, sat there and said we had actually our best term deposit rate for interest rates in the last 12 months because interest rates were higher. And it managed to, this last tax year, we ended up in deficit. Whereas, but that high interest rate significantly reduced the deficit from the interest in the savings account.
That's right.
So there are, but I mean, also like the other one is low interest rates aren't a sign of, like, that's not a good performing economy. That's the economy heading down the rocks, and the aim of low interest rates is to pump money in the economy. The problem with the New Zealand economy is the fact that we pump our money into housing, because a lot of people got very badly burnt by the 87 share market crash, because New Zealand was very out of whack with their burntness rate in that share market crash compared to elsewhere in other parts of the world. And that's the problem in New Zealand, is we have this fascination with housing and the fascination with property.
Yeah,
and that's the thing is that, I believe we need to work on our way to reduce our dependency on housing and shift it to more productive parts of the economy. One thing that was done by Labor was to remove interest deductibility on existing builds. So it encouraged people to add new builds to the system. National has reversed that, which then incentivises to buy existing housing stock. I don't believe they should have put the interest deductibility not just on rental new builds. They should have also put on residential new builds as well. So that would incentivize new homeowners to buy new houses. And I would say if they gave them 20 years interest deductibility, that would encourage them to stay long term into that property and have it tied to the property rather than tied to the person in the house necessarily. So it incentivizes. In Australia, they had this in the 80s and 90s, was that if you weren't a citizen, you were allowed to buy a new house that added a new house to the housing stock, but you weren't allowed to buy existing dwellings. That was something in there. I think that was a bit xenophobic of Australia, but there was a foundational principle behind the idea of, well, if you're buying a new house, you're adding to the system, you're not taking away from the system.
Well, I mean, look, COVID came in, and I felt that there was pressure from the government of the day at that time, Labour, and Finance Minister Grant Robertson was trying to up the votes of Labour Party for the coming election in November. And the the lowering of the interest rates would then allow more Kiwis to buy and more people become happy, and more like the printing money thing, and that actually created also a big hole in the system that led to so many jobs being lost. So, I mean,
they were also building a whole heap of Kiwi-Bird houses, many that currently have had their buildings paused. Well, and some people criticise the debt of Kiwi-Bird, but they don't sit there and take a look at the asset value increase at the same period of time. That's something else that was in there of like building houses. And now some of those houses are sitting half built, and building companies are going bust because their contracts have been stop work. So that's the other side of it, of what happens when there is induced demand and then induced demand reduction methods. It can make a boom bust be a hell of a lot more pointier than it needs to be.
I mean, I empathize with those who lost their houses. I mean, you're talking about maybe 15 years of savings, like 200,000 New Zealand dollars.
Which also, if you're on a benefit, once you hit $8,000, you're no longer entitled to the accommodation supplement. Just to point that out there, that same figure was in the 1980s.
Yeah, I think it led many house owners to become on MSD because they were really, look, when it went up to 6%, I mean, people were saying, my God, I'm paying $2,000 more a month.
Yeah, no trust, yeah.
And there was nothing.
Also, what happens when you have interest rate, when you have an economy that runs away in one direction and all sorts of things there. I mean, because interest rates are meant to be what is meant to try and stabilise growth and demand. It's not meant to let things go in there. And that is something where, and actually here's a good one actually to point out there. If you're in Wellington City Council social housing, you're allowed $99,000 in the bank before you're ineligible for that house. But working income, accommodation supplement caps out at $8,000.
All right, okay.
Just to put something in perspective, because Wellington City Council has adjusted their criteria with inflation.
But they still allow you to I guess, own a home. So,
allow the foundation block to own a home. Yes, that is correct. Yeah, allow the foundations, because in order to at that $99,000 figure, at a 20% deposit, that could buy you you would, at a deposit aspect, a $500,000 mortgage. $400,000 mortgage, $500,000 property. Which, I mean, to be honest, you're probably not going to get now in Wellington, but you could possibly get in Upper Hart.
I don't think so, Sam.
Property price has broken the 600,000 mark up there.
Oh yeah, it has, but I don't think it would. would change affect for grants and stuff though.
Yeah.
It's gone up a lot nowadays, so
Now,
even the small houses.
Yeah, should we listen to Priyanka, considering Blake has told us we've got to listen to Priyanka?
Yeah.
I'd like to ask the Minister a couple of questions, given that she has repeatedly said that she's committed to better outcomes for disabled people. However, we don't really see that outlined in the budget at all. I've got a couple of specific questions around, and I'll start with the minimum wage exemption. I do note that the Minister has said that has noted that she's been asked this by other members before, but I have quite a specific question because the Minister has said and is on record saying, from memory during the estimates hearing as well, that the reason for scrapping the work on the minimum wage exemption and deciding not to scrap the exemption itself, which of course is part of Budget 24, and returning the money that was put aside for that to the centre. The Minister has said that this is because Disability Enterprises has come out and said that they cannot guarantee that jobs will not be lost as a result. I have spoken to them since, and that is not the understanding. What we have heard from them is that they wanted the detail of the policies that was announced by the prior Labour government. So given that that's not what they have said, and I cannot see that in any quotes from them in any media as well, I'd really like to know from the Minister why she made the decision to do that, if that's not a purely cost-cutting exercise, as it is being seen by disability communities more broadly. That is my first question. I'd like to know whether 37 million that was earmarked for the minimum wage exemption to be scrapped, where is that going, is one question that I'd like to know. The second is really around baseline funding that was earmarked for this year for the EGL rollout, the Enabling Good Lives rollout, which is now being used to shift DSS to the Ministry for Social Development. Given that that's baseline funding within the estimates, I would like to know why she's decided to use that funding to make this shift, given that there's been absolutely no evidence in any of the reviews that this is actually going to lead to good outcomes for disabled people. I'd also like to know how she's committed to better outcomes, given that she has cut access to flexible funding. She's put a freeze on residential care, which means that some of the most intellectually disabled New Zealanders will not gain access to residential care. She's paused EGL, and as I mentioned, now using money that was earmarked, the budget that was earmarked for 2024's EGL rollout, to shift DSS into MSD, a ministry that does not have the capacity, capability, nor the inclination to be able to administer disability support services. And she's gutting Whaikaha, the Ministry of Disabled People, a ministry that disability communities fought for many years. I'd also like to know, Minister, where the 1.1 billion that was earmarked in Budget 24 is actually going, because as far as I can tell, no one within the sector knows where that money is going either, and would like some transparency around that in Budget 24, because really all the sector is feeling at the moment is considerable anxiety and distress because of reviews that have led to changes that were not even recommended within the review. So if this Minister is saying that she's committed to better outcomes for disabled people, where are they?
Mr Chair, I thank the member for the question because it gives me the opportunity to put the facts on record, which is quite different from what the member was referring to. I also didn't address the comment about tangata whaikaha from the previous member's question, and I would just remind the House about the increase in investment of $1.1 billion, which the previous member has asked about. So let me, I didn't want to repeat things that I'd made in the opening statement, but let me go back to make it clear to the member. The unfortunate reality is that the Disability Support Service was getting to a period where it was running out of its appropriation. And it was not necessary for it to do that. It was not necessary for it to do it. So in previous years, if you look 8 to 10 years earlier, the increases, if the member wants to hear the answer, I'm happy to do so. If they're not, then I will return to my seat. So the increases were in the sort of 2 to 3 to 4% on an annual basis. In the previous 3, 4, 5 years, they went to double digits. So no one could explain double-digit increases. And so that is why the unfortunate reality of Whaikaha being in a situation where they were running out of their appropriation. So what did the government do? The $1.1 billion included $80 million to ensure that Whaikaha could continue to provide disability support services to the 30th of June, and it covered that appropriation. Yes, it did mean some changes to the guidelines around flexible funding, and I appreciate that that was incredibly stressful at the time. So the review was necessary. It found far more than we expected it to. As I said, it is not a failure of funding. With the increase of the $1.1 billion, it is a failure of the system that the previous government set up in a rush and just set these very high expectations and then left it to be. There is an incredible disparity across New Zealand for disabled people in terms of the services and support they can access. That's clearly unfair. And it's not sustainable at the moment. So the first thing we have to do, in answering the member's question about Enabling Good Lives, our government is committed to the vision and principles of Enabling Good Lives. What we are doing at this point in time is stabilising the system before we seek to improve it. And for those of you who have been involved with a business or an organisation that is broken and failing, job number one, stabilise it. Stabilise it. That's what we're doing with urgency. And the independent review panel made some recommendations. One of them was to maintain the level of funding to residential providers at last year's rate, while a rapid review into pricing can be undertaken to understand why, despite there being fewer people in residential care, the increase in costs is over 30%. Right? So understanding what is driving the increase in costs is pretty fundamental in stabilising the ship. And that is exactly what we are doing. So in terms of the funding allocated for Enabling Good Lives, yes, as I said, job number one is stabilise the system. That is why we have had to set up a task force. They have a range of work. Two of the future pieces of work that members will be really interested in is looking at flexible funding, looking at the guidelines, what should the rules be. This government fully understands the value disabled people place on choice and control and flexibility, which is why, with these recommendations, it is absolutely critical that we understand and can decide together with disabled people, organisations, families and carers what those rules should be. Too little, too late. Well, actually, that former minister should have made sure the organisation was set up to be successful, because disabled people have paid the price for that, and I think that's really unfortunate. What we are committed to doing is fixing the system, getting to a place where disabled people have greater access, fairer access. We are targeting the support based on those who have the highest needs. And I also want to address the issue of creating a standalone ministry. So instead of FICA, the Ministry of Disabled People, Mr Chair.
Honourable Louise Upson.
So much of it. Oh.
Please release your tensions, Blake, because you are personally affected by the minister's actions.
Yeah. How can we get services if she cuts them all? And
good question.
And the only reason why the industry is in crisis is because of her government, not Labour. She blames Labour, but she's done all of this damage in 6 months. So she can't blame Labour.
I'm with Tui Ono on this one. I was watching his expressions in the background, which, going through all his paperwork, and it's like, what?
Yeah, you can tell he's definitely like, bullshit.
But what was the issue? Like, I understand that all of those, the working for families think that everyone got like $60 to $200.
Yeah, no, this is separate from working for families.
The pensioners only got $2 and the disability people got $2. Was this an issue? I mean, that...
it would be a completely separate budget. So the thing with Waikaha was they had what was known as called flexible funding payment. Blake, correct me if I get anything wrong here.
Yeah.
But the principle behind that was to give the person who is disabled more discretionary in ways that their funds could be spent to better suit their needs, rather than having a one-size-fits-all approach. And a good example that can be brought up here that is like Hana Hiki. Her biggest gripe in Auckland is the fact that she can only get around by train. And the solution to people who are mobile go, why don't you just catch a wheelchair taxi that isn't available?
Yep.
Because she's got a more bigger than normal wheelchair. Like her biggest issue in Wellington is the fact that, she can get from Wellington Airport to Wellington CBD on the bus, but she can't get around by, basically there's no wheelchair taxis after 6 p.m. in Wellington until 7 a.m. in the morning, and 75% of the day they are taken up with MOE runs.
So more discretionary and more contextual would be something that Blake would be, and those with disability would look for or hope for, is it? Rather than one size fits all.
Correct.
Yes. And you are saying that because of what the current government has done and for disability people, is that they have created a one size fits all? But I thought if you need a wheelchair, they would of course grant the provisions to buy a wheelchair. So it's still discretionary.
It's also like things like what's it called? Some people with autism can't speak, so they may be given a tablet that can communicate. Greg O'Connor's son is one of those people in that boat, Michael. Michael don't speak at all. However, Michael can communicate effectively using the tablet with a text-to-speech software. But some people might say, that's a luxury. That's unnecessary, not realising that it's a fundamental foundation for that person to communicate in society. And so, and that's the thing you get there is you get some people who don't know the full details, make bad judgment calls, and say, no tablet. Sorry, I think that's a toy. and then they end up sitting down there and making that person's life harder. The hospitals, I think, Blake, you might be able to tell me, they're very common for doing that sort of thing.
Yes. Yeah. If you want to hear self-plug, but if you want to hear a good story about my struggles in hospital, go back and watch one of the episodes on Paul the other one from a few months ago, and that'll give you a bit of insight into what I went through, so I don't need to go on and on and on this and take up Sam's time.
Yeah.
But what I would recommend is we should replay that when Nick's with us tonight, because he has a lot of strong views on that.
Oh, yes, but that show tonight's about the gang legislation and the Education Amendment Bill.
All right, well, that'd be great. That'd be good. Yeah, I might join them as a spectator. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Well, we need more viewers. Feel free to share it around. We need more subscribers.
Yes, we do.
We're going to have to call this show to an end because we'll have to get to our next flash bit. So submissions that are coming up for this week that need to, a bit more than this week, but need to sit there and do, get your submissions up. The inquiry into the banking competition, you've got till this Wednesday night to sit there and get that submission in. Also, heading is the bill that took forever to be allowed to go to select committee. I'm actually not sure if it's technically meant to have got here yet. On the smoke-free amendment bill number 2, which is regarding vaping products, that is due to be in this Friday, which is a very short select committee period, considering we were able to submit on it a week ago. And the social workers registration amendment bill, that closes on Sunday the 6th of October, which is in the middle weekend of school holidays.
Right. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, it's so those are the bills that will be on there. What's your verdict on the appropriations bill being question and answers of committee of the House?
Oh.
That a lot.
How many grey hairs have everyone got?
Huh? How many grey hairs have I got?
Yeah, within the last 2 hours.
I mean, my cat's covered in grey hairs, so how many have you got, buddy?
Well, this is just a joke, right? Before we end this, is that if I get appointed as one of the ministerial advisors, I'll be closing up many of the holes that the opposition.
Well, Blake will make a very good advisor for disability issues, even that you're probably going to tell me there are even some better qualified people out there, such as like Nick Rani.
I'll be speaking of which, I'll be back with you guys tonight. So
I'll close up all the loopholes.
Put it this way: if they can put me as an advisor, I would like to do is about local government and voting and voter integrity and voter information. That would
I'm always happy to talk about trees.
Yes. Anyway, guys, just if you like, just for everyone watching, just donate to it's in the ballot. They're doing a great job to provide this kind of independent view, which we are all benefiting from.
Or you can join us on Patreon and make sure you hit the subscribe key on YouTube, because we need those 500 subscribers so Frosty can pay his late fee for a super chat.
Yeah, that's right. All right, come on, guys. So just not watch, but contribute to the poor, the weak, the lame, the blind. Right, Mike. So thanks for the time. I appreciate that.
That's all right. Thanks for being on there. I mean, this is probably, I think long term, we might make this a Patreon only or a members only show for the urgency special, as I call it, because something I've learned is it's very difficult to cover legislation when you have events like extended sitting and urgency, because they do so much more in the same period of time.
Well, I mean, we are actually in what we call democracy in action. Yeah, and that's what.
Oh, and I mean, put it this way: extended sittings, I've got no problems with, because how do I call it? It doesn't, you can't go through all 3 stages of a bill in one day if it's for extended sitting.
Well, I did a lot of extended sitting reading these debate transcripts this week, so...
Well, at least you guys haven't used the hammer and sickle on me yet. So.
Well, yes, if you get me on New Year's, I'll be at Vinegar Hill selling coffee.
Just kidding.
That's what's like. Yes, well, I did buy a new tent from Torpedo 7 today, known out because they had a 30% off special, and it is known as called the Air. It's an Air Tent 300, which is meant to be a free-seated, a free-person tent, but sorry, it's called the Barista's Palace.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you for sitting there joining us, and for our panelists, feel free to stay over for a post-chat conversation, and we'll see our viewers back here at 8 o'clock tonight to talk about the more important stuff, the Gangs Bill legislation and the Education Amendment Bill, which is focusing on charter schools. So let's sit there and see you all there at 8 o'clock. Have a good evening.
All right, see you guys. Yeah, take care. All right. Bye.
Thank you for watching The Order Paper, your express ticket to the New Zealand House of Representatives. Every episode, we unravel the complex world of legislation, debate, and democracy. From bills to select committees, we've got it all covered. From our team of political commentators who will dissect and explain what's happened so you can remain up to date on what's happened in the Aotearoa, New Zealand Parliament. To support our channel, you can become a Patreon member at patreon.com/it'sintheballot. The Order Paper podcast is brought to you by It's in the Ballot Production.